Just a few weeks ago, two nuclear powers entered a direct military confrontation. India and Pakistan never fully agreed on how the disputed region of Kashmir should be divided. But this time, tensions seemed higher than ever. How close did they get to an all-out war? And what's going to happen next? Stay with me to find out here on Wider View. And I'm your host, Mateusz Mazzini. Good evening and welcome back to our studio in Warsaw. After two episodes recorded during Impact CE in Poznań, we're back on home turf. And immediately, we're taking you for a spin around the globe to Kashmir, one of the most contested parts of the world. Ever since 1947, when India gained independence from the United Kingdom, this northern region of the subcontinent has remained a major source of tensions between the governments in New Delhi and Islamabad. A few weeks ago, a new chapter in this confrontation was opened. The Pakistani government informed the international community that an attack on its borders from India was imminent within the next hours. It did materialize, although a little later and on a different scale. Historically, India and Pakistan clashed over Kashmir several times, but not since the use of drones, Chinese military tech, and advanced intelligence has become so widespread, and not to mention under the threat of a nuclear conflict. With both sides armed to their teeth, hostility and diplomatic rhetoric, and a number of foreign players invested in the conflict, can stable peace ever be achieved on the subcontinent? We explore the options in our report.
The immediate source of the most recent escalation between India and Pakistan can be traced back to April 22nd, when a group of 25 tourists was attacked by armed militias near the village of Pahalgam in northern India. The authorities in New Delhi immediately blamed the Pakistani side for ordering the strike and promised swift retaliation. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi even introduced the country's armed forces to use whatever means necessary against Pakistan. Despite appeals and warnings from the international community and the United Nations, a strike was eventually launched on May 7th. India sent rockets over the border into Pakistani territory, targeting supposed terrorist infrastructure. After 3 days of fighting, a ceasefire was agreed, but both sides remained hostile and tensions continued to be high. This was not the first time that India and Pakistan clashed over Kashmir. Their first escalation dates back to 1947 and the partition of the two countries. Another installment of this conflict took place in 1965, escalating into a full-scale war. In 1971, tensions led to the borders being redrawn again. India and Pakistan clashed over the latter's eastern parts, which resulted in the establishment of Bangladesh as a sovereign state. Military calculations changed inadvertently in 1974, when India acquired nuclear capabilities. Pakistan followed the same path in 1998, raising the stakes into a potential confrontation even further. Right now, both sides are declaring their willingness to hold peace talks, but the picture in Southeast Asia is getting more and more complicated. China, which also claims parts of Kashmir, has its own interests to pursue. Arguably, a permanent solution to this crisis has never been more distant.
Will a lasting peace in Kashmir ever be possible? Who has the upper hand in the current conflict? And did Donald Trump really put an end to the fighting just a few weeks ago? There's a lot to be unpacked in this very complex case. So we decided to invite experts who follow the matter very closely on the ground. And I'm pleased to say, joining me tonight are Sushant Sareen, Senior Fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, and Stanley Johnny, International Affairs Editor at The Hindu. Good evening both and welcome to Wider View.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So Sushant, I want to begin with you and do some, let's call it, reverse engineering. Let's start from the latest. Where are we right now in the current installment of the Pakistani-Indian conflict over Kashmir, and how likely is the current stage to last longer?
Well, I think currently both the militaries have disengaged. There is a tense atmosphere, but I don't think there's any immediate danger of any kind of hostilities breaking out. But there is a caveat to that, which is that under the new doctrine, which has been enunciated by the Prime Minister in India, if there is an egregious terrorist attack, there will be a response from the Indian side. I think the cup of India's patience with Pakistani-sponsored terrorism is running over. And quite clearly, the country is now resolved that costs will be raised for Pakistan if there is any act of terrorism which can be traced back to Pakistan. And in this last particular attack, the Pahalgam attack, which you were mentioning in your report, it is very clear that the group which initially took responsibility is a front organization of an internationally proscribed terror group called the Lashkar-e-Taiba, which is based in one of the centers. Its main center is one of the places that was bombed on the night of between 6th and 7th May. And when in your report, one point I think I should mention, when you say that these were supposed terrorist bases, these have been well-established terror camps and headquarters of terrorist organizations, many of them internationally proscribed, not just by the United Nations, but also by the United States and many European countries. So those were the bases that were attacked. And then, of course, a conflict broke out. But it kind of peaked in about 4 days. And then both sides separated. So there is a tension in the air, but no immediate threat of hostilities breaking out.
That is a very important comment, a very good overview of the situation right now. But now I wanted to move to you, Stanley, and ask about something that could be potentially defined as a blame game between Pakistan and India. And before I continue with the question, I wanted to play a short clip from a public appearance by Prime Minister Narendra Modi just recently, who produced some sharp comments about the current state of affairs between India and Pakistan.
Friends, India believes in tourism. Tourism connects people. But there is also a country like Pakistan which considers terrorism as tourism, and this is a big threat to the world.
So these are not particularly conciliatory remarks, at least this is how they come across. Given this statement from Modi and the overall line of politics on behalf of the Indian government, how likely is it that the current state of affairs, the disengagement of the militaries on both sides, will actually extend into the future?
I think there is, there is an international understanding that Pakistan continues to back anti-India terrorist organizations. Sushant has referred to Lashkar-e-Taiba, and then you have Jaish-e-Mohammed, Hizbul Mujahideen. You can also find Pakistan's activities in Afghanistan, where it continued to back different groups. What the Prime Minister was talking about, I think that is a very well-established, internationally established fact here. That's one thing. And secondly, yes, it doesn't sound conciliatory, but Indian government's official position is that even after the May 10th understanding was reached between India and Pakistan, India said that, there was an understanding now to cease hostilities, but there is not going to be any more talks. This is what the position India has taken. And what we have to understand here, I think the interesting point here is that India has adopted a new approach towards these repeated terror attacks. And the new approach is that in the past, when there were attacks, India's position was to mobilize international public opinion, isolate Pakistan internationally, or mount economic punishments on Pakistan, etc., etc. This was effective to a certain effect, definitely. But at the same time, Pakistan always felt the protection of its nuclear threshold. right? But if you look at from 2016, there is a clear change. There is a pattern in India's response. In 2015, after the Pathankot attack, initially, India basically cooperated with Pakistan to investigate the attack. But what the Pakistanis did was to go back and blamed India for the attack on India's soil. And again, in 2016, after the Uri attack, then India responded militarily, and this military response was limited to the Pakistan-held Kashmir. But again, in 2019, after the Pulwama attack, in which over 40 Indian security personnel were killed in a suicide bombing, India basically targeted, Balakot in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So that went beyond the Kashmir region. Mm-hmm. And then in 2025, after the Pahalgam attack, what India did on May 7th was to basically target terror infrastructure in Pakistan's heartland, both in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, but as well as Pakistan heartland. So the message India is trying to say is basically that Pakistan's continued support for these groups or the continued terror attacks on Indian soil will be met with India's response.
So I'm going to jump on this real quick because we understand very clearly the position of the Indian government, but I wanted to stay with you actually, Stanley, and look at the other end of this equation, the Pakistani side, because we understand where India is coming from, but the Pakistani government seems to be trying to convey a completely different type of message. And in fact, we do have a quotation from the Pakistani Prime Minister during just recently his visit to Iran, and while being in Tehran, he said, "We want to resolve all disputes, including the Kashmir issue and the water issue, through negotiations, and are also ready to talk to our neighbor on trade and counter-terrorism." So a very straightforward question. Where is this difference in rhetoric coming from? Why are Pakistanis coming across as more conciliatory, for lack of a better word?
So, I can't say why Pakistan is coming out with this message, but the question here, if you look at it from an Indian point of view, is that whether Pakistan can be trusted, because in 2015, the Indian Prime Minister went to Islamabad, met the Pakistani Prime Minister. So India actually sent out conciliatory, sent out a hand to Pakistan. And what happened in 2016 was a terror attack. So here, now Indian position is that now, yes, there is a disengagement between both countries. But what happens next is basically dependent on what Pakistan is going to do next. Unless Pakistan takes action against these terrorist groups, or if attacks continue in Indian soil, then a normalization of the relationship is not possible.
So we understand that the ball is in the court of the government in Islamabad. But given all the overviews that you both have produced, I wanted to move over again to you, Sushant, and ask about the background, because this isn't the first time that India and Pakistan are clashing over Kashmir, and they have a long history of mutual engagement over that region. But this time around, it feels different. Is it different?
Let me correct you. We did not clash over Kashmir this time. We clashed because there was a horrific act of terrorism in which 26 people were killed in cold blood after being asked what their religion was. And if they were of the wrong religion, which is Hinduism, then they were shot in cold blood in front of their wives and children. This is not something which any country can take lying down. For many years, India has actually taken it lying down, no longer. So it is now a materially different situation. And as Stanley very correctly said, the response from the Indian side is now steadily being ratcheted up. And quite clearly, the message to Pakistan is that, look, if you thought that you can carry out terrorism and then think that you can bring us onto the table, then that's not going to happen. And let me just add on the question you put to Stanley, what the Pakistani Prime Minister, who doesn't really count for anything, be rest assured, he is less powerful than an ordinary man on the street.
So I'm going to jump on this. I'm going to jump on this real quick and ask you to elaborate. When you say that the Prime Minister of Pakistan doesn't really exercise that much authority, what do you actually mean by that?
What I mean is that this is a man from a party which had lost the elections. They were made to win the elections by the Pakistan army in an election which was completely rigged. And frankly, I think the European Union should actually be looking at itself when it talks about democracy around the world. The EU played a scandalous role in turning a blind eye to a very blatant rigging of elections in Pakistan. So this is a man whose party probably won 16 or 17 seats and then was made to win about 80, 85 seats and a coalition cobbled together. A coalition which depends entirely on the support of the Pakistan army, which calls all the shots. So anything Shahbaz Sharif says is not taken seriously in any case, number one. Number two, what is very important is that this is the worst kind of virtue signaling that the Pakistanis are past masters in. This is like trying to show to the rest of the world that, look, we really want peace and we want progress and we want all kinds of nice things to happen in the subcontinent. But does the Pakistani Prime Minister commit to wipe out the nests of terrorism which are surviving in Pakistan with the complicity and the complete involvement of the Pakistani state? And why I say this is that when a terrorist base was hit in Pakistani Punjab, and the funeral prayers of these terrorists were being carried out, there were Pakistan army officers who were attending those funeral prayers. And these people are openly strutting around on the streets of Pakistan, even after this particular operation, with the complete sanction and complete support of the Pakistan army. Now, Shahbaz Sharif does not say this when he goes to an international audience. So this is the typical dissemble which comes from Pakistan. And frankly, I don't think anybody in India is biting the bait.
Well, that's a very direct statement on your behalf. I will actually stand the ground here and say that I don't think European Union has much to say in terms of getting involved into domestic elections of any non-member state or member state of the European Union for that matter. Yes, please go on.
Let me challenge you on that, please. The European Union gives Pakistan major trade concessions. And because of those trade concessions, Pakistan has to sign on to something like 27 conventions, which Pakistan has not fulfilled its obligations. One of those is on democracy. The EU sends its observers to Pakistan to look at and monitor elections out there. What do these observers go and do? Party out there, or do they actually look at what has actually happened in the elections? So please, I'm sorry, I'm not going to give the EU a clean chit because we've seen a lot of virtue signaling even from the EU on these issues.
Nobody's asking for a rain check here on behalf of the European Union. I think we can agree on to disagree on this and move to another very important aspect of our discussion. I wanted to come back to you, Stanley, because one of the topics that's almost immediately brought up every single time there is violence in this part of the world is a potential likelihood of a nuclear confrontation. And we see right now on the screen the comparison of the nuclear arsenals between the two countries, both of which have nuclear capabilities. So 2 questions in one, if you please. How close did we get to a potential of a nuclear confrontation this time? And did we ever actually get to close enough to a confrontation in the history of the mutual clashes between the two countries?
So in this conflict, India never resorted to any kind of nuclear saber rattling. India never made any rhetorical statement about nuclear weapons. So India, from the very beginning, even if you look at the very first statement Indian military issued after the May 7th attack, India said that these were the attacks directly aimed at terrorist infrastructure in Pakistan. India did not hit Pakistan's military infrastructure. Which was basically a message that India is not involved in a confrontation with Pakistan. India was basically taking on terror groups inside Pakistan. And India did not want to escalate this into an open war. Forget about nuclear confrontation. So throughout this war, India, I think, was very careful and very cautious in its statements, even in its attacks. But whereas on the other side, you would see that there were reports inside Pakistan saying that the Pakistan government had called for a meeting of the National Command Authority, which is basically the authority that is in charge of Pakistan's nuclear decisions. So Pakistan basically resorted to nuclear saber rattling. And there were also reports in the Western media, like the CNN reported that, the Americans got some alarming intel. I don't know what that alarming intel was. And after that, Vice President J.D. Vance talked to Prime Minister Modi, etc., etc. So, I don't know what the intel was, but basically the Pakistanis were sending signals, saying that they called the strategic authority meeting, command authority meeting, etc., etc.
Sushant is also raising his hand very politely to add something. So please comment on this. But since I have you here, I'm going to also ask you another question about the position of other actors in the region, especially China. So if you could add your comments and also answer the question of how China and other parts of and other countries in the region position themselves in this recent conflict.
So I think on the nuclear issue, the fear was more in the West. I don't think either Pakistan or India, despite the fact, and Stanley is quite correct, despite the fact that there was some kind of nuclear signaling from Pakistan initially, and then they backed off. They said that we are calling a meeting of the National Command Authority. This is on the day when 11 of their air bases had been taken out. They said we are calling a meeting of the National Command Authority, and then they denied that such a thing is being done. In fact, their deputy prime minister and their defense minister and some other officials, including from the military, said that we were nowhere near close to any kind of a nuclear exchange, first. Secondly, I think please look at how the entire, the kinetics of these entire operations happened. I think both sides were quite careful in the selection of targets. Civilians were not hit. Civilian infrastructure was not targeted. They kept it well below any kind of a nuclear threshold. So I think there was a certain amount of responsibility from the Indian side, as well as, I have to say, and I'm no fan of Pakistan, but also from the Pakistani side. So I don't think there was any kind of...
That's very noble of you. Thank you.
Because I'm normally not very charitable towards them. But in this particular case, I think that was a fact. Or at least this is what we saw on ground. On the issue of China, I think the Chinese, of course, continue to back Pakistan completely. There's no doubt about it. But if you look at the public statements of China, when the first day when India launched the attack, the Chinese didn't go ballistic. They didn't come out, with their bats swinging against India. They did not do any hostile moves along the border. And in fact, their statement said they were dejected or something to that effect. So it was a pretty light, very evenly kind of worded statement. And even later on, their statement, which came after the cessation of hostilities, was somewhat, pretty even. I wouldn't say it leaned either in the direction of Pakistan or in the direction of India.
It clearly shows, and it transpires from what both of you are saying, that it will take more than one single round of talks, and perhaps even an involvement of a third-party mediation to solve this conflict, which means we will be coming back to revisit the topic in further episodes. Sushant Serene and Stanley Johnny were our guests tonight. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
India and Pakistan are not just nuclear powers. They are also growing, extremely powerful economies with gigantic domestic markets. Their influence, both politically and culturally, spills over to neighboring states and even further in different parts of Asia. Their conflict will likely continue, but another direct confrontation will have dramatic consequences for many other countries, not just in Asia. Thank you for being with us tonight. Next week, we will return to Europe and try to find out whether Great Britain has actually grown closer to the rest of the continent. Make sure you're with us next Thursday, follow us on YouTube, and have a good evening.